This is Jed Disler, and welcome to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. I want to thank all of you who have taken out subscriptions to The Piano Maven through my Substack page, and paid subscribers get free monthly music downloads and other goodies. So consider taking out a paid subscription, which will help keep this podcast in production. You know, doing this podcast takes a lot of time and work, and sometimes people think I just roll out of bed and stagger over to my computer and I rant about recordings off the top of my head, but it's not all that simple. Nor was it simple for me to pick 5 commercially released recordings of the Sonata in B minor by Franz Liszt to talk about on this episode. We did an episode about live performances of the Liszt Sonata recently, so I thought I should do a Liszt Sonata episode where I've picked 5 Liszt Sonata recordings that I've reviewed for ClassicsToday.com in the past, and all of these I think qualify as being under the radar. And that includes this one by Van Cliburn. It's his 1975 studio recording. I don't know if it was recorded in 1975. I know it was first issued in 1975 on RCA Victor. And it tends not to get spoken of often when people talk about the great Liszt sonatas. But I think this one is quite good. And if you really like a meaty and big-boned Liszt sonata served up in the grand manner, Van Cliburn will definitely satisfy you. He wears his heart on his sleeve, to be sure, but he doesn't belabor obvious points. And he grabs big virtuosic passages by the scruff of the neck. And he's really quite diabolical in the fuguetta, but he always takes the time to sing out lyrical passages. I think this is an interpretation that's all of a piece, and it showcases Van Cliburn's instinctive musicality and his emotional generosity at its most communicative. Now, I know there are a few live Van Cliburn Liszt Sonata performances out there, and I know that some of you are going to write to me and say, hey, you know, these are better than the studio recording. But I did want to talk about the studio recording because it really should get some serious reconsideration. Another recording of the Liszt Sonata that I like a lot that you might not know about comes from the Czech pianist Jitka Čechová. And this pianist first came to my attention for her complete recorded cycle of Smetana's piano music on the Supraphon label. And there is this live recital disc with her that's also on Supraphon. It has the Brahms Sonata No. 3 coupled with the Liszt Sonata. Her Liszt Sonata takes 29 minutes, so you would probably assume that her tempos tend to be on the fast side, but they're relatively conservative tempos, in fact. But you do get a sense of each section flowing coherently and effortlessly into the next section in long integrated arcs and paragraphs. This is kind of a centrist regulation model Liszt Sonata, but I wouldn't say it's anonymous, and I was very happy to hear it again. Now, on the French Mireille label, there is a terrific live Liszt Sonata with Boris Berezovsky. He isn't always the most subtle pianist in the shed, but this is a really good Liszt Sonata. It's fresh and it's vividly detailed at all times. And he uses almost no pedal in the exposition section's octaves, but he shades them with discrete harmonic pointing so they don't sound dry or notey. And the lyrical second theme is very straightforward. It doesn't dawdle as it sometimes can. And in the coda, there is tons of rubato, but it's meted out in intelligent proportions, which helps the music build when it should. I think this is one of Berezovsky's best recordings. There's another excellent Liszt Sonata that features the Ukrainian pianist Alexei Grynyuk. And I first heard him play during the 2005 Van Cliburn competition's preliminary rounds. And years later, I had the pleasure of reviewing his solo piano debut disc that came out on Orchid Classics. This includes a really persuasive version of the sonata. His tone, I think, is as rich and burnished as that of Claudio Arrau. His octaves are as pulverizing as those of Marta Argerich. And he shares Alfred Brendel's freedom from sentimentality, but he's a little more emotionally generous. And he also has the concern for contrapuntal movement that Leon Fleischer has in his recording. But I would say that Alexei Grynyuk fuses all of these qualities that I've been talking about into his own very personal, and I would say it's an emotionally three-dimensional interpretation. And it's gorgeously engineered, too, which is a big, big help. And another supremely well-engineered Liszt Sonata recording constitutes my fifth recommendation. And this is a recording with pianist George Emmanuel Lazaridis. And this is a subjective and highly rhetorical interpretation that I think is stylistically similar to Claudio Arrau, and sometimes it evokes the even more subjective and often idiosyncratic gestures in Ernst Levy's recordings from the 1950s. For example, George Emmanuel Lazaridis often stretches that repeated note theme. He often stretches that out to the breaking point, yet never in a mannered way. And, even Arrau could go overboard in this passage. And Lazaridis treats the difficult octave passages like music instead of gymnastics. And melodic shaping more than speed really seems to be his priority in this interpretation. But on the other hand, he's almost deadpan in that D major second theme. He doesn't emote over it. He really just plays it straight and rather offhandedly. Yet for all of the personal rubato and subjective moments, the interpretation in the end conveys a lot of drive and momentum. Also, the sonics are just gorgeous. This came out on a SACD on the Linn label, Linn. And if you are a real audiophile who wants a Liszt Sonata that will show off your stereo system, you will really like this recording. I'm sure that I can find 5 more under the radar Liszt Sonata recordings to talk about, and maybe I'll do that another time soon. But I'd like to know what your favorites are, whether they are under the radar or over the radar. This is Jed Disler, and you've been listening to The Piano Maven, your friendly podcast guide to piano recordings. Thanks for tuning in, and I look forward to being with you next time.